Hello, and welcome to Based on Facts, where fiction and superstition meet logic and scientific facts on WELT 95.7 FM, broadcasting from the Allen County Public Library. My name is Chris Rex, and on this week's episode, we're going to be talking about how humans really struggle when it comes to scale. Okay, whether we're talking about really big things or really small things, we as humans, we just have a lot of trouble wrapping our minds around those types of numbers. And so it kind of comes down to this notion that throughout our evolution, back when we were cavemen, so to speak, we really didn't have the means to calculate very large numbers or to look at things that were incredibly small. Just because we didn't have the technology, essentially. And so when it came to what we were doing, what we are doing in modern society, now you're seeing all this stuff come into play. Really, really big numbers and really, really small numbers. And we're starting to have a bit of a disconnect between trying to confer that kind of information to an individual that isn't necessarily the most mathematically or statistically inclined. So that's really what this episode's all about, is really just kind of getting at that main point. Because a number of different concepts in science can be kind of lost in the mix, just because it's really hard for us to understand beyond a few digits. It's really hard for us to understand exactly the scale that's going on there and the importance and relevance of those scales. And so I'm just going to kind of give you a scenario here and kind of break down the universe for you a little bit. Just to help you understand the scale a little better. I'm not going to use exact steps that, use exact intervals that are going to be exactly comparable to what we can imagine in our minds, but I'm going to at least try to keep it at some reasonable sort of interval here. So really when I'm talking about interval, I'm talking about powers of 10. Alright, because 10 is very powerful. Using powers of 10 is very powerful. That's why the metric system is used by a majority of the world, except for us, of course, because we're American. And screw metrics, right? But the great part about using powers of 10 is that it keeps it real simple and enables you to imagine what's going on there to some degree, because we can all count 10 items. Most of us can count 100 items. But once we get to about 1,000 items or so, that's when it starts becoming kind of tedious and very difficult to count or to estimate numbers that are that high, and to really understand the importance once we get to that 3 or 4 digit range. It becomes very, very hard for our brains to wrap around those concepts. And so what we're going to look at here is just kind of breaking things down into the extremely micro and nanoscopic types of things, and then kind of zooming out and seeing the entire universe as a whole, and trying to get an idea of the scope of that scale, because it is enormous, far beyond anything that we could possibly imagine. So let's start here in the moment. I am a human right here in front of you, and we're starting at the scale 10 to the 0 power, okay, which is, say, 1x magnification. All right, let's zoom out a bit. All right, so let's throw the camera a ways from me, and now we are at a power of 10 away from me, so now I'm a tenth of the size that I was before. Okay, so let's just say, for instance, I'm throwing the camera 10 meters from me. Alright, now I'm a tenth of the size I was before in the camera's eye. Okay, let's do that a second time. Alright, now we're at the level that we can start to relate with a little bit more. Because we can look out to these ships sitting in the harbor and be like, hey, that is a giant ship. Whether we're looking at like a cruise liner or a replica of the Titanic, That's kind of the level that we're looking at right now, is a zoom out level of 100x essentially. Okay. Now the Titanic, for instance, was 883 feet long, and so that kind of gives you an idea. That's you know, a little over 100 times longer than I am if I was to, lay down flat. So cool. That's kind of the 10 to the second power magnification outwards for us. Now, if we go another one of those distances outwards, and even a little bit extra, we end up at 10 to the fifth power, okay, which is basically to say 10,000 levels outward, okay, and at that level, or I'm sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no, that's 4, yeah, that's right, 10,000 levels outward, and at that level we can see an entire state. Okay, let's just pick an average state here in the US. An average state is about 300 miles wide, and that's at the level that we're seeing now at 10 to the fifth power zoomed out from me. Okay, let's go out another couple powers here to 10 to the seventh power. So that would be 1 million, and now we're able to see the entire Earth. Okay, the entire Earth is 7,900 miles wide, give or take. So almost 8,000 miles wide. That's pretty big. Pretty big. Cool. Now let's zoom out another couple factors here to 10 to the 10th power. All right. So even adding another 1,000 to that. So now we're 1 billion times zoomed out from me. That's where we're able to see Alpha Centauri. Okay. Now Alpha Centauri is actually our closest star system to our particular star, the solar system here, and it's actually 4.4 light years from this solar system. So they're the next star, the closest star to us is in that system. All right. And it would take us, if we were traveling at light speed, 4.5 years to get there, essentially. Okay, now let's zoom out even further. Another 5 factors here of 10. And that's where we're able to see some of the cool nebula. If you've ever looked at some of the old NASA pictures, some of the first pictures that they've really gotten that were really stunning from the Hubble telescope, I believe, it showed these beautiful nebula just sitting out there in space. They had these wonderful configurations. There's this one called the Cat's Eye Nebula, another one called the Hourglass Nebula. Those guys were absolutely beautiful and stunning. Graced the covers of magazines when they came out, basically. That's at 10 to the power of 15. Okay, away from this solar system, beyond our nearby star systems, and that's where we can start to see these nebula. Okay, absolutely incredible to think that something that is 3,300 light years from here can be seen with one of our telescopes. Absolutely phenomenal to think about. Go another few factors of 10 here to 10 to the 20th power. That's where we can start to see the entire Milky Way galaxy. Alright, because that's actually 100,000 light years wide. So decently sized. I mean, it's kind of on the smaller side for when comparing it to certain other galaxies, but I don't know, it's alright. We zoom out another few factors here, several factors in fact, 10 to the 26th power. Okay, so that's 10 with 25 zeros on the end of it, and that's where you can start to see the entire observable universe. Okay, or I'm sorry, that's 10 with 26 zeros on the end of it. I'm messing up my my counting of zeros here. But yeah, so 93 billion light years is how wide the universe is thought to be. Okay. We cannot even begin to imagine 10 to the 26th power of anything, much less half of that, much less half of that. It's very, very, very hard for us to wrap our heads around how huge that is, okay, and how many trillions upon trillions of stars and planets are in the universe. It's just absolutely phenomenal. If we go the opposite direction, okay, starting with me, the power of 0, 10 to the power of 0, so we can get to the 1, 1x magnification. If we zoom in a little bit on something small that we see every day, maybe a pea or a coffee bean or something, something that's maybe 1/4 of an inch long or so, we zoom into that, we can picture that. We can see it with our naked eye. We have no problems doing that. Okay, that's about 100x zoom in onto this object. So 100x magnification to see the object really up close. Now if we go a little closer, we can see the smallest thing that we can actually see with our naked eyes, and that is the human egg cell. Okay, that females produce, that gets fertilized by the sperm, and then becomes, full adult human with any luck. Okay, human egg cell is a pretty large cell. Most cells we cannot see with the naked eye, but human egg cell we can. So human egg cell is actually 0.1 millimeters wide. Alright, so if you're used to using a ruler that measures in the metric system, you know that you can measure in centimeters, you know that you can measure in millimeters, but really the finest detail you can get without aid from some sort of magnification device is about 1/10 of a millimeter. Beyond that, it's really pretty hard for us to discern it without help from technology. So, we can see things down to the 10 to the negative 4th power, which is to say something that is 10,000 times smaller than anything that we're used to seeing, with the naked eye. Okay, so we can see down that far. Now, if we go another few factors, zooming in here, we reach 10 to the negative 9th power, where we're able to see porcine circovirus, okay, which is to say it's a very, very small virus. It's actually the smallest virus that's actually functional, and can infect our cells, basically. And this guy is so small that we start to measure him in a different measurement system, okay? I mean, before we were saying 0.1 millimeters, now we're down to nanometers, okay? And this guy's actually 1 nanometer wide. Another way to say this measurement system at the very, very tiny level is to say angstroms. All right, at this level we could start to use angstroms, which are actually a measure of how wide an atom is. Okay, the radius of an atom, essentially. So we could start to look at that level and say, aha, okay, so this virus is so small, it's equal to about 10 of these angstroms. Okay, about 10 atomic radii comprise this virus. That's how small it is. Okay. Now, granted, viruses tend to be tightly packed with those atoms inside, so they could probably be pretty efficient and fit a number of different atoms together in a configuration. But just to give you an idea, it's going to be pretty tiny. All right. Now, if we go another step down here, we reach the atom level, because we were just about at that angstrom level. So that's where we hit the size of an atomic radius at 1 angstrom. Then we go down a few steps further, 10 to the negative 14th power, and that's where you can start to see the nucleus of the atom. Alright, so we have about 4 levels of separation there between the outside of the radius of an atom and the inside, or where the nucleus is. Okay, so there's about 4 powers of 10 between there, and we'll get back to that here in a sec. But essentially, nucleus of an atom is what we call a 10 femtometers. Okay, which is a femtometer is basically 10 to the negative 15th power meters. So cool. You see a nucleus. Now, if we break the nucleus down, the components of the nucleus, the protons and neutrons, we break those guys down, look even further, another power of 4 further, and we get to 10 to the negative 18th power, where we start to see quarks. All right, and quarks are measured in another different kind of unit called an attometer. Okay, so they're about 1 attometer wide, and that's going to be the 10 to the negative 18th meters, essentially. So very, 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 very small these quarks are, because they're what comprise neutrons and protons. So yeah, needless to say, very hard for us to track all those numbers, to think about all these different things, just because there's so many digits, so many number places that we have to count, keep track of. It's just, oh my gosh, mind-boggling. That was probably incredibly boring and completely uninteresting to you, but decided to go through it just so you had an idea of how complicated it can get. Alright, now to bring it back and try to relate it to something that you can understand, that I can understand, that we can work with and talk about, we can go back to an atom and a nucleus. And the nucleus of that atom, I should say. Because really, when it comes to understanding what an atom is, we typically picture protons and neutrons, glued together in the nucleus of the atom, and this little electron kind of flying, just a little ways out from the nucleus. But as I just said, there's actually 4 powers of 10 separating those two things. Okay? At least 4 powers of 10. So that's to say there's 10,000 worth of a difference between where the nucleus is and where the electron is. So to put that in perspective for you, since once again that's a little outside of the range that we can imagine, if I made the nucleus of an atom the size of a pea, okay, just one little pea, and if I stuck that into the middle of, let's say, a football stadium, the electron would be flying at a distance equivalent to the outer rim of the stadium. Okay, so you would have the nucleus in the exact center of the field, and the electron would be way on the top bleachers, just dancing around that rim. Okay, that's how far that electron is from that nucleus, if the nucleus was the size of a pea. So if you consider what makes an atom, most of it's empty space. It's crazy to think about. Most of that area is empty space. It's phenomenal. There's very little substance to any of this. And yet atoms are so powerful. They're what comprise all matter as we know it. I am composed of of billions and trillions and probably quintillions worth of atoms. Okay, so many atoms inside me right now, and yet most of that area is space. And somehow I can touch my fingers together. I can feel that sensation, despite the fact most of me is empty. Kind of boggles the mind when you think about it. Now, just to relate a couple other topics to this, okay, if we, instead of making a nucleus the size of a pea, let's say we took a nucleus of an atom and made it about a foot wide. Okay, and let's say we did the same thing with the sun. The sun that Earth revolves around each and every day, each and every year, I should say. Every day it just kind of rotates. Each and every year. And this sun was also made into the size of a 1 foot diameter. Nucleus is 1 foot in diameter. Sun is 1 foot in diameter. How can we compare those two? Well, if we make those scale changes, we see that the distance between the nucleus of an atom and its electron floating way off over here, the distance between these two is just about equivalent to the distance between the Sun and Pluto. And even though Pluto's not technically considered a planet anymore, we do kind of consider it to be a dwarf planet, so I mean it kind of counts. But we've always known Pluto to be one of the outermost objects in our entire solar system. And yet that distance is exactly what we're talking about at the atomic level. How does that work? What kind of coincidence is that? All the empty space in a solar system is essentially the same amount of empty space in an atom. That's crazy to think about. And so just to put some numbers behind some of these things, the distance between the Sun and Pluto is actually 6 times 10 to the 9th kilometers. If we consider the distance between an atom and the electron, it's about 10 to the negative 5th or 4th meters. So pretty phenomenal, because that's once again that's approaching those numbers that we don't understand very well, that we can't really wrap our heads around. What's really cool is that we can relate these same types of distances and huge amounts of empty space to further levels of magnification. So let's zoom out even further. Alright, we looked at it here on planet Earth with the stadium example. We looked at it in our solar system with the Sun and Pluto. Let's step back a little further. Alright? That's where we can start to see other neat things. Like the distance between the solar system that we reside in and the nearest galaxy, which is the Andromeda galaxy. So between our solar system, or our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, distance between there and Andromeda is about 2.5 million light years, which is essentially 2 times 10 to the 19th kilometers. 10 to the 19th. Okay. The distance between the Sun and Pluto was 10 to the 9th. So we've now doubled that distance. Okay. Distance between the Sun and Pluto was actually child's play compared to the distance between our solar system and the Andromeda galaxy. Huge amount of difference now. That's why we're getting into the millions of light years. Okay, that's just insane to think about. And that seems to be the level that the higher levels of space operate on, though. Okay, because yeah, we have this galaxy that's way far from us. But you know what? That galaxy is still kind of close to us. It's actually considered, along with the Milky Way galaxy and a couple of other galaxies, it's considered to be part of what we call the local cluster. And so we have kind of this loose collection of galaxies that are kind of close to each other. We call them the local group, I should say. And the nearest group or cluster, if you want to call it, is M81. Alright, the M81 cluster is actually 11 million light years away. Okay. That's the closest thing to our local group, is this M81 cluster. And it's even further away than the previous level we just looked at. Another order of magnitude. Alright. Once again, just insane to think about. Things are just becoming more and more empty space between each of these levels. We go out one step further, step between our supercluster, which is to say our local group, this M81 cluster, and a couple of other clusters. They're all relatively close together, and they're all in what we call the Virgo supercluster. Now, if we look at the distance between this Virgo supercluster and the nearest supercluster to that, we get to the Hydra supercluster, which is actually 1 times 10 to the 21st power kilometers away, which is 100 million light years. So you see, we've gone from 2.5 million light year distance to 11 million light year distance to 100 million light year distance. We just keep upping it by 1 power of 10 each time. And so, once again, even more empty space. So that just starts to boggle the mind how much of the universe is empty. Now, just to clarify, I mean, when I'm saying empty here, I'm not meaning that it's truly empty. I mean, at the subatomic level, quantum level, some weird things are happening. Particles are coming into and out of existence. They are warping from one place to another. They're doing a bunch of weird things, and a lot of weird stuff happens at the quantum level. So when I'm saying empty, not necessarily meaning empty, but for the most part it's empty. Okay, as you know, we also have gases, random particles, even waves out there. So, you know, whether we're talking about radio waves or light waves, whatever, there's a lot of different stuff out there, but there's definitely a lot of area that is empty space, and for all intents and purposes has minimal function other than just to be space. Okay. But anyway, I digress. So that kind of brings us around to quantum physics, which is one of my favorite topics. I do still love me some quantum physics. Now, I'm not by any means an expert at quantum physics. It's more just a hobby of sorts. But it's just neat to kind of look at. I mean, especially when we're talking about instances like this, where we're observing these huge scales and these very small scales of everything in the universe, and recognizing how much of this really depends on quantum mechanics and our understanding of quantum mechanics. So we have all this empty space. Well, what's the significance of that? I don't know. And that's part of what we're trying to figure out right now. Just because there's so much stuff out there that isn't stuff, so to speak. It's not made out of matter, so we're having trouble understanding it. And its role in astronomy, essentially, or cosmology for that matter. Now, the thing that I really like about quantum physics that we do know is we know that if we look at a subatomic particle, we only have one of two choices. We can either determine its position or we can determine its velocity. We cannot simultaneously determine both, which is to say that we can either find out where it's at or we can find out where it's going. But we can't know both of those things. And that starts to break your brain when you start thinking about that. You're like, what? How does that make sense? So you're telling me you can only tell where a car is or where it's going, but not both. That really doesn't tell me anything. And this is the problem that quantum physicists have. Just because they really struggle with this. They're like, what? What is this? This sucks. I can't get very good data on this. You expect me to get something from this? So they have a challenging job, let's put it that way. I do not envy them in their task. But what's really cool about it is if we go to look at some of the applications in the real world, and some of the cool things that we can start doing at that quantum level. At the level of protons and neutrons and electrons and quarks. That's where all the fun is happening. The macroscopic universe is fine, completely understood, no surprises there at all. Chemistry, there is no surprises in chemistry. Okay, all very, very straightforward. Physics is where we start to get some of the weird stuff going on. So that's why it takes a little bit of time and effort and determination to try to understand some of this stuff, because honestly I'm still struggling with some of it myself. But anyway, digress. What's really cool about quantum physics beyond that is understanding that these sorts of subatomic particles can behave in one of two ways, and actually kind of both ways simultaneously. So sometimes they can behave like a particle, very standard. If you imagine a gun, you point it, you shoot it, a bullet comes out and it hits the target where you aim it. Boom. We can kind of think of that as a particle gun. All right, shooting a particle and that particle hitting a target. Cool. Nothing special or wrong or confusing there. Now, if we change that gun, instead of being a particle gun, we turn it into a wave gun. Now weird things happen. Okay. Now the trajectory isn't necessarily straight. The trajectory can actually be changed, or it can kind of be in multiple different places simultaneously. So when we're looking at the trajectory of a wave, we see that it can actually almost reach behind a target to some degree. Okay, so let's say I was aiming to shoot a can. I was on top of a pillar with this wave gun. If I point this wave gun at the can, somehow this wave can simultaneously shoot the pillar, the can, and a little bit behind the can, all at the same time. And that starts to break your mind. You're like, well, how does that work? And yet we see this phenomenon every single day. Every single day. Because we are exposed to light. And light acts as both of those things, a particle and a wave. Which makes it really hard to study light, because you never know what it's going to do. If it's going to be a wave in this instance or a particle in this instance. We see this all regularly. We see this on a regular basis because we actually look at shadows. If you look at shadows, you'll notice that the shadows, they don't have straight edges, normally speaking. Normally, they have some sort of fuzzy border or edge to it, between the dark and the light. There's some sort of interface zone where there's a little bit of dark and a little bit of light. That's just showing you that the light is behaving as both a particle and a wave. So, to explain some of the harsh elements, the straight line borders, that's light behaving more like a particle. Okay, it's being blocked by some object, and it's basically going on a straight line trajectory to the ground. Going on a straight line trajectory to the ground from that point. The fuzzy border, on the other hand, is actually where we're having light act as a wave, and the light is kind of maneuvering around that object to some degree kind of reaching around the object and touching a little bit of the ground that's behind the object. So it's almost kind of cheating or fishtailing over there to kind of infiltrate some of that darkness, kind of make that border fuzzy as opposed to harsh and straight. That blew my mind when I learned that little tidbit. I believe I was taking a chemistry class actually, and I ended up learning that. So yeah, we're exposed to light being a particle and a wave all the time. Just to make this even more interesting, we all know that light is absorbed by plants to make energy, right? So plants have these specialized little organelles in their cells called chloroplasts. The chloroplasts actually contain a number of different structures for capturing the light. They contain these pigment cells, they contain chlorophyll, and these structures capture the light energy, and they have to try to take that light energy and transfer it to a couple different places before that light energy can be used to create the sugar or glucose that a plant needs to create in order to survive, in order to grow and reproduce and all those fun things. During this process of taking that light from the sun and transferring that energy downstream to other structures within the cell, within the chloroplast, during that process, it kind of behaves as both a particle and a wave in some cases. And we've actually seen how it can act as a wave at first. Okay, so let's say we have two structures here in the cell, and we have one structure that's trying to transmit the light energy to another structure. So structure 1 is trying to transmit light energy to structure 2. Well, structure 1 can sit here and send a couple different waves of light energy, and based on where those waves hit, somehow it sends feedback back to structure 1 saying, hey, okay, well this wavy path down here, that really didn't pan out. So let's try up here. So kind of waves up here too. Kind of feels around and says, well, that top route really didn't work so well for me. Let's try this middle route here. And so it kind of flops over here, and it contacts a structure that ends up being able to absorb that light energy. And so structure 1 basically sends a particle of light to structure 2. Now that the waves have kind of gone out in front and scouted for the most efficient path to structure 2. Then you're like, oh my gosh, how is this happening? That's insane to think about. Think that this kind of stuff is happening at such a microscopic level. Once again, with all this empty space at the atomic level, at the subatomic level, these waves and particles are traveling immense distances through empty space. And to think that anything can even remotely, get from point A to point B without getting lost in that kind of area is just astronomical. I mean, it takes our human technology a whole lot of effort to be able to precisely send a spacecraft from the Earth all the way to Pluto. That took an immense amount of effort. And yet, at the atomic level, with all these subatomic particles and waves flying around, that distance is nothing, comparatively speaking. It's a drop in the bucket to what these waves and particles are doing and how precisely they can end up finding their target in order to transfer energy most efficiently, when a plant is trying to create glucose from sunlight. Just freaks me out sometimes how creepy and crazy efficient some of these biological mechanisms can be. Anyway, I think the other real big thing that I really want to cover is regarding time scale. Okay, we've been kind of talking about distance scale, because that's definitely an important topic. A lot of people really don't understand that very well. And I think time is even worse. Okay, just because we are on this planet for, a measly 80 years, on average. And so it's kind of hard for us to imagine what happens outside of that time span. Okay. Me myself, I'm just a shred over 30, and it's really hard for me to imagine 80. All right. Now, an 80-year-old can probably much more easily imagine 100 years than I can, no doubt. But I don't think they can really start to imagine what 1,000 years is like. So that's where we start to see a bit of a disconnect. Is once we hit, maybe a couple hundred years, 1,000 years, that's where people really don't understand the time scale very well. Not at all. Now, obviously, when it comes to time, we don't tend to measure time very precisely unless we're talking about chemistry and how long some of these new hyper-radioactive elements on the periodic table last. When they're talking about 10 to the negative 20th seconds. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I'm never going to need to count that low in my entire life when it comes to time, so it's hard for me to care, admittedly. But when it comes to 10 to the 10th power in seconds, that's much more relevant to the world around us, even though we still can't really picture it. Okay, I have no idea what that is. No idea how much that is, or what I can relate it to. I have no idea. So we have to try to use a different way to try to get a grasp of all these different time scales. And when we're talking about time scales, we're typically talking about the evolution of life on this planet, because that's really the most interesting thing. And so if we took basically all the major events throughout geological time on this planet, and we map those according to scale, if we map those onto a clock face, then we could have midnight being the dawn of this planet, essentially, after it formed from the beginning of our solar system here. So we can kind of count that as, minute, second, whatever, 1. Alright, so let's say this is millisecond 1. Alright, and that's when the Earth forms. Now, if we sit there and fast forward to about 4 a.m., that's where you start to see life forms appearing. Okay, so basically, just a little over 10% of the clock face is now gone just to form life. Actually, that's about 15-20%. So yeah, a lot of the clock face is already gone, just creating those first life forms. Okay, and that's because it took about 1 billion years to form those first life forms. I actually think it was about 0.8 billion years, but I don't think we're going to split hairs over exact amounts here. But yeah, so that's kind of cool. If we take a look here, we end up seeing the first bit of fossils being found a little bit after that at about 5:30. We see some algae forming about 2 o'clock roughly, 2 p.m. And that's kind of humbling to think about. You're like, well, life just formed at 4 a.m. How did algae just form at 2 p.m.? we're already through halfway of the day, according to the clock face. That's extraordinary to think about. Literally, half of this planet developed without significant amounts of algae life on it. So that's pretty crazy. If we continue the clock here, we can see complex organisms, okay, like jellyfish and trilobites and stuff. They start to appear around 9 p.m. So we're already 3 hours to midnight, man. We haven't even gotten to any of the fun animals yet. Most of Earth's history was very, very simple, if any life. So that's really humbling to think about. You're like, oh my gosh, that is a long time. So let's take a look here. Dinosaurs, okay, things that we tend to think of as being, 65 million years ago, that was forever ago. I mean, gosh, man, I can't picture that long ago. Well, guess what? Dinosaurs came onto the scene at about 1056 on this clock face. So we are almost 1 hour from midnight. And we are just now getting to the dinosaurs. Man, time flies when you're having fun. Tell you that much. That is crazy to think about. And then, of course, we can talk about us. Alright? Us as humans, because we know that humans have been around in one form or another for probably 250,000 years maybe or so. Tracking back to some of our most recent ancestors of humans. So 200,000 years, once again, I can't imagine that at all. So it's, once again, kind of humbling that I look at this clock here and it says, humans show up on the scene at 11:58 in 43 seconds. We are a mere minute and 17 seconds from midnight when we evolve. We are so beyond insignificant when we consider the life history, or the history of life on this planet. It just blows my mind. I still just marvel at that wonder, because to think that we've only been on the scene for just over a minute, and we're already making irreparable damage to this planet, is just breaks my heart. I don't entirely understand the motivation of some people who seem so bent on raping and pillaging everything that they can just so they can survive this moment and thrive and be wealthy. I don't really understand that, because it's costing the rest of us. It's costing the future. Not to say that I'm perfect by any means. I mean, I definitely am a consumer, an American consumer, and I get a lot of stuff, and probably have a lot of stuff that I probably shouldn't have. I probably definitely don't need. But guess that's just kind of the American way. And that's unfortunate, because it kind of detracts from how insignificant we are and how little time we've had on this planet, and we're already screwing it up in a way that's not able to be repaired easily. I mean, the fact that we have to sit here and try to put mandates on fossil fuel use, try to switch over to green energy, just to help remedy all the damage that we're doing right now. I mean, it's an uphill battle, so to speak, and I don't know how it's going to end up, or what the future holds for us. But I do know that I think one of the ways that we can help the planet fare a little better at the end is just with education about stuff like this. Helping understand that on the big scheme of things, we are nothing. Nothing. Big scheme of the universe, big scheme of uh, the universe, just because we are so small in it. And then even when it comes down to the quantum level, I mean, we're much bigger than the quantum level, sure, but we're still pretty insignificant, really, compared to that. And then, yeah, just looking at evolution on this planet. We always think about the dinosaurs as being so long ago, and look at that. It's not really that long ago. We are so new on the scene. It's incredible that we've been able to take over the planet in this short of time, so to speak, and really become masters of this planet and everything that's on it. Just kind of crazy to me. So I think I'll go ahead and cut it off there. Just really want to convey that point, that it's very difficult for us to understand some of the scales of some of these things. And one of the ways that we can try to help our ability with these, help our disability, so to speak, with managing large or very, very small numbers, is to work with things that we know, that we can work with. Like I said with the clock face, we basically took 4 billion years or so and condensed it into 24 hours. And we understand 24 hours. We can relate to that. We can understand 24 hours, we can understand 60 minutes. We can understand those, we can count those. We cannot count 4 billion. That's ridiculous. And we've seen this used in our own human history a little bit too. If you talk about back to the Roman times, a Roman legion consisted of 5,120 soldiers. Well, you didn't have scouts spotting that Roman army and going, okay, that's 1 guy, 2 guy, 3 guy, 4 guy, whatever, all the way up to 5,000. No, he looked briefly at it. He said, okay, well, there's easily over 1,000 here, easily over a couple thousand here, easily over a couple thousand here. That's probably the 5,000 in a legion. That's probably 5,000 in a legion. Look in the back, another 5,000, another 5,000. So instead of, counting them all up and saying, oh, these were 20,000 troops, I counted every single head. They didn't do that. They looked at a large group of them, they guesstimated, and then they just multiplied it by how many groups. Like, okay, well, it's times 4, so there are 4 Roman legions, so we know that is 4 times 20, or 4 times 5, to get 20,000 troops. Boom. Cool. Kind of shortcutted the issue. Just kind of cut right around it. So that's awesome. Makes it very easy for us at that point. So at least we have some way to deal with all this stuff, because otherwise we would just be perpetually done for when it came to trying to understand scale. And I'm trying to learn more about it myself, trying to prepare myself more for counting up groups of things as opposed to counting every single little thing. So, I don't know. That's just kind of one of my strategies, I guess, and it's worked for other people in the past. So, thank you for listening today for Based on Facts. My name is Chris Rex. If you're interested in finding any of our episodes, you can find them online on Facebook and YouTube just by typing in Based on Facts in the search bar, and you should be able to find our episodes. So, thank you so much, and have a great one.